Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name's Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Lieutenant Colonel Charmaine Benfield. Today marks the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the Japanese merchant vessel Montevideo Maru. When morale fell to the Japanese in January 1942, more than 1,400 members of Australia's Lark Force were captured. Some 160 were killed shortly after the surrender. Later that year, on the 22nd of June, approximately 850 prisoners of war and 200 civilian internees were ordered by their Japanese captors to board the vessel Montevideo Maru. The ship then sailed for the Japanese base on Hainan Island, keeping to the east of the Philippines to avoid Allied submarines. 8 days into the voyage, the Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon. Unaware of the ship's cargo, Sturgeon manoeuvred into position and fired its torpedoes. According to both Sturgeon's log and accounts of Japanese survivors, the Montevideo Maru sank by the stern in roughly 11 minutes. Although the crew was ordered to abandon ship, they apparently made no attempts to release the prisoners. The loss of the Montevideo Maru remains Australia's worst maritime disaster. The ship was carrying more than 1,050 Australian prisoners, none who survived the sinking. Today we remember all those who were lost in the Montevideo Maru and whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour. We will shortly recount the story of just one, Sergeant Richard Leslie Spooner of the 2nd 22nd Battalion. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We're honoured to welcome Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, and Miss Gillian Adamson. Wing Commander Sharon Bowen, Council Member of the Australian War Memorial. Mr. John King, ACT President, the Returned and Services League of Australia. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Could I ask you to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first, we present a lament, flowers of the forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant Richard Leslie Spooner. Richard Spooner was born on the 20th September 1916 to William and Eliza Spooner of the Melbourne suburb of Mentone. Known to his friends as Dick, Spooner grew up near Mentone Breach, was a keen participant in the local scout group and came to be a leading member of the Mentone Surf Life Saving Club. After his education, he worked as a school teacher in the Foster District, a dairying and grazing community southeast of Melbourne. Spooner enlisted on the 25th of May 1940. He was posted to the 2nd 22nd Battalion, which moved to Trawool in central Victoria for training in July. In late September, the battalion made the 235-kilometre journey on foot to Bonegilla on the New South Wales-Victoria border. Spooner's capacity for leadership soon became apparent, and he was promoted to acting Lance Corporal in December. After further training, Spooner and his battalion were sent to Sydney in April 1941 to prepare for active service in New Britain. Arriving at Rabaul on the 26th of April, the battalion formed the main element of Lark Force. Tasked with protecting the airfields at Lakanai and Funakanau and the seaplane base at Rabaul, the battalion spent the following months constructing defences and training for operations in the tropical environment. Spooner's promotions continued, and on the 1st of January 1942, he was promoted to sergeant. It was about this time that the Japanese bombing of New Britain began, increasing in intensity as the month continued. By the 22nd of January, 24 Squadron had been virtually destroyed, and its 3 remaining aircraft were withdrawn. As there was now no use for the airstrips, they were destroyed, and Lark Force withdrew from Rabaul, waiting on the western shores of Blanche Bay for the inevitable Japanese landings. These began at 1 a.m. on the 23rd of January. Overwhelming Japanese strength and a breakdown in communications quickly cracked the cohesion of the Australian defence. Realising the futility of his situation, Colonel John Scanlon ordered a withdrawal on the basis of every man for himself. Over the following days, groups and individuals sought escape along New Britain's north and south coasts. Some found small boats and got away on their own. Others were picked up by larger vessels operating from New Guinea. Around 400 members of Lark Force managed to return to Australia. A grisly fate awaited those who were captured. On the 4th of February, a group of 160 men were massacred at the Toll Plantation shortly after their surrender. Sergeant Spooner was lucky enough to avoid this fate. He was among the group of approximately 850 military prisoners and 200 civilian internees that were ordered aboard the Montevideo Maru on the morning of the 22nd of June. 8 days into the voyage to Hainan, the Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon, which manoeuvred into position to fire its stern torpedoes. Survivors from the Montevideo Maru's Japanese crew reported 2 torpedoes striking the vessel, followed by an explosion in the oil tank in the aft hold. The vessel sank in as little as 11 minutes. Over 1,000 prisoners died. According to a surviving Japanese crewman, Australians in the water sang Auld Lang Syne to their trapped mates as the ship sank beneath the waves. The sinking is considered the worst maritime disaster in Australia's history. Unaware of the ship's loss, the families of those on the Montevideo Maru, including Sergeant Richard Spooner, continued to send letters in the belief that their loved ones were being held as prisoners of war. It was not until after the war that, discovering the fate of those lost on the Montevideo Maru. Today, Sergeant Richard Spooner is commemorated at the Rabaul Memorial, at the Montevideo Maru Memorial in Ballarat, and the Rabaul and Montevideo Maru Memorial here at the Australian War Memorial. Spooner's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving the Second World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant Richard Leslie Spooner, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.